Welcome to Legacy Unscripted, sponsored by Progeny Coaching. This is the podcast where sports and business collide. I'm your host, Russ Katzman, and here we skip the fluff and we get straight to the hustle. From athletes turned entrepreneurs to impact-driven business leaders, we dive into the wins, the lessons, and those failures that make our legacies worth living. Today, I'm excited for the conversation where I welcome Shaluka Pereira, CEO and business owner for Renovation Cells in Cary, North Carolina. Shaluka, welcome.
Thank you, Russ. So happy to be here.
So I know you're currently running Renovation Cells, but one of the things you mentioned to me was that at one time you ran a brewery. Take me down that road and tell me how that came to be.
Yeah, well, all of us like beer. Well, many of us like beer, right? So this was, 15 years ago, something like that. At the time, I was working in the corporate America. I was a executive at IBM. And then one of my colleagues, he was a home brewer, right? So, guess what we did during weekends? He would call me and say, "Hey, Shaluka, I'm making this, Vienna lager or whatnot.
Yeah.
Come on, you want to have a taste?" So we would just sit around, sometimes help him brew, right? We spend the whole Saturday doing this, and man, his beers were pretty awesome, right? So I was like, "Hey, this stuff tastes pretty darn good," and he would bring it to work and share with the folks to take it home, whatnot, right? And one thing led to another. I'm like, you know what? Why don't we, go big? Why don't we take your home brewing business, your passion, your hobby into a real deal, right? Operating brewery.
Yeah.
And for me, it was not so much about making the beer, right? Hey, don't get me wrong, I love my beer, right? But making is such an arduous job. That wasn't where my head and heart was. But I really wanted to open a startup, right? Go through the whole startup experience, take a concept, right? Take it through the whole stage of raising money, making it a real business, and then having a successful exit strategy. So I was fortunate. I had good partners. We went from backyard brewing to a brewery in downtown Raleigh called Nickel Point Brewing Company. That was kind of the birth of our little microbrewery.
That's pretty cool. So it sounds like you kind of wanted to go down that entrepreneur and startup route. Did you always have that passion? What was fueling that?
In my old age, I look back and I think I always had the entrepreneurial urge in me, right? Even when I was in corporate America, I always seeked, and sometimes by luck, I landed jobs where, you are put into a startup environment, right? You're given a little bit of freedom and say, listen, you got some funding, it's a brand new team, or you got to go build a team. Let's try to launch this product or a service, right? So I had that knack of landing those opportunities or starting those opportunities. So that was kind of my thing, right? And then now, fast forward decades, right? I think that's my passion, right? I like to open businesses. I like to keep it sort of flexible, agile, nimble, right? So that's in me. That's who I am, right? So again, I'm running a business today, and we kind of take those philosophies with us.
Okay. And so when you made that transition from corporate America to being an entrepreneur, first of all, how much time are we talking? I mean, how long were you still running your quote unquote day job and running the brewery on the side?
So I did that, for the entirety of 5 years running the brewery,
Wow.
plus maybe, I don't know, two years or so getting it up and running. For that entire period, I worked. I had a day job, right? So those were very long days, right? I would go to work,
Mm-hmm.
and as we all know, right, IT jobs are not eight to five jobs, right? So I would go to work, spend the whole day there, and then bug out at the end of the day, go to the brewery, check on things, right? Check on daily status. Oftentimes, go home pretty late, right? So that was a lot of work. That was a lot of work. Long days.
I bet it was. Was it worth it?
Um, that's a great question, Russ, right? I mean, some days I'm like, well, what the hell am I doing, right?
Yeah.
What did I get myself into? But then, you look back, you learn a lot, right? Everything we do, whether it's just doing a day job, whether it's opening a business, there's a lot of learnings to be had, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
look back and I learned a lot, right? I learned a lot. We made some mistakes. We learned from those mistakes. And honestly, those mistakes and those learnings are helping me kind of drive my new business in a different direction.
Yeah, I think we as humans, our ability to forget the pain that we put ourselves through I think it's definitely an advantage. Obviously, nobody would ever have more than one kid, but the same sense, nobody would ever start more than one business.
Right.
Right? You go through those long days, you go through the sleepless nights, you go through the uncertainty around cash, you go through the process of trying to figure out your product, your ideal client, all of that. Um, and it's arduous. It's something that if we had our choice and we remembered the pain from the first time, we may not do it again.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So so talk to me then about selecting, you went down the brewery route. How did you end up with Renovation Cells? That's a different type of business model completely.
Yeah, so I think, again, going back to kind of touching a little bit on the entrepreneurial spirit, right? As
Hmm.
I've always had a knack for real estate. I believe, and this is my personal belief. I'm a firm believer, um, acquiring wealth, building capital, can be done with successful investments in real estate, right? Whether it's
Yep.
renting, owning, renovating, constructing, whatever, right? That I've been a firm believer. So with that at the back of my mind, I've always had a small investment property portfolio for the last 15 years. And when you are kind of doing your own thing, right, you become the handyman. Oftentimes you have to rush and fix a plumbing leak. I liked it, right? That gave me a little bit of an outlet from the high tech world. So on
Sure.
weekends, I can just put my gumboots, put my jeans on, and go hammer some nails and build a deck or whatever, right? So I liked it, right? So when I left corporate world a few years ago, and as I was pondering, hey, what do I do next, right? I quickly realized going back into hospitality, like the brewery, is not for me any longer, right? It's a lot of work. It's good, right? The risk factor is higher,
Hmm.
so renovations became an obvious choice. Fortunately for me, I had built connections with a lot of great crews, so I had that right to kind of start off with. So renovations became kind of a combination of, it gives me again the opportunity to do a startup, right? Build my own business, leverage something that I enjoy, not just construction, right? I love getting outdoors. It's a gorgeous day out here in North Carolina today, so I can get
Sure.
out there, walk around, enjoy the sunny days, right? Whatnot. So this was a obvious choice.
Now, sometimes when we have a hobby like this or something that's cathartic for us versus our day job,
Mhm.
we go into business with it and it takes some of the joy away from it for us. Have you
Yeah,
seen any of that, or is it just as joyous today every day you get to work in it?
yeah. Somewhere recently I read a quotation from somebody, and I don't remember who it was. It said, "As long as you love 20% of your job, you're going to enjoy it as a career choice, right? So
Hmm,
everything we do has things we don't like. You mentioned it earlier, right? Cash flow, right? Cash flow is a big issue for any small business, right? How do I
sure.
how do I make the ends meet at the end of the month, right? So for me, there are challenges, right? It's not a fairy tale story from the time I get up in the morning. So there are challenges, but I look at those challenges and try to figure out how to resolve them. At the same time, I look at the positives, right? And I try to enjoy my job, right? So it's a balance between what you like, and it comes with that the little bit of baggage you got to deal with.
Okay. Very good. And now, how big have you grown in the time that you've been doing it? Do you have a handful of people working with you? Do you primarily use subs? What's your work like?
Yeah, yeah. So the best practices in this industry is to leverage as many subs as you need, right? So we are 100% sub-driven business model. So this is our third year, but it is our second full calendar year, 2025.
Okay.
We grew from nothing, right? We grew from nothing to a $1 million business in our first year. So
Mm,
we have growth targets to meet this year. But yeah, it's been pretty good, right? So we've grown from just a handful of subs to generally speaking, a crew of about 40 people. There are all kinds of trades, from electrical, mechanical, plumbing, general handyman services,
sure.
right? You name it. So yeah, it's a good crew, and we're hoping to stay on that same growth trajectory for this year.
That's incredible. Now it's interesting when I'm working with clients, there's a couple different inflection points, some big ones as they grow. One of which is that first million, right? They get to that first million and it takes a certain amount of effort and struggle to get that far. But then to go from 1 to 10, they realize they have to do things differently. Have you
Yeah.
started to realize that? Have you started to look at how do we have to change the way we're doing things to grow by 2, 4, 10x beyond where you are?
Well, that thought and the sort of the how to get there crosses my mind every day, right?
Hmm.
As a business, you always want to have a sort of a plan around growth. But we're not quite there to make some, so I call them, significant changes, right?
Sure.
Um, for us, the next big inflection point is how do we increase our sales and marketing footprint, right? And the reason I emphasize that is I am in a business where it is very much relationship driven, right? You meet
Yep.
your customers, you meet your realtor partners, and you form a bonding, right? You form a relationship. So in order to do that, you got to meet them in person, right? And that's your sort of boots on the ground sales. And let's be pretty candid. This is a saturated market, right? At the
Hmm.
core of our business, we are a general contractor, and there are many general contractors out there, right? Some have been around for decades, right? So how do
Sure.
we not only build a relationship, how do we bring value to both our homeowners, our real estate partners, and then drive our differentiation, right? So marketing and sales is really what's going to drive those initiatives. So for us, the next big thing is how do we beef up our marketing and sales efforts.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting because you know, probably 80% of the time, people come to me for coaching and they say, I need more sales. I need more sales. I
Yeah.
need more sales. And inevitably, I will come back to them and say, if I doubled your sales, could you handle it? Right? If you put something out there in the market and people bid on it, and for whatever reason it just blew up, could you handle it on the operations side?
Yeah.
And typically they come back and say no. And so then we have a conversation around growing both of those side
Yeah.
by side. To
Mhm.
your point, sometimes it's a little sales and marketing, sometimes it's working on those subs. But it's a delicate balance of too much focus on one or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime I talk to just candid conversations with some of my business coaches and my, financial analysts, right? That's the question they would ask, very rightly. So they're like, Shaluka, hypothetically, if you get, you know, if you double your leads, right? Are you guys able to handle it on the back end? So that's definitely a fine balance. You're absolutely right. And honestly, it's more than that, right? Yeah, I can probably put more people. I can probably get those jobs done. But then there's also a quality, right? So we got to meet a certain level of quality. So you
Yeah.
you can't compromise quality either, right? Then all those sales you got next month, you're losing them because all you need is a few bad reviews, right?
Yep. And worse yet, you said it's
Yeah.
a relationship business. You burn a relationship by one bad job. Now you no longer have that referral to get another relationship.
Exactly.
And that's the in a relationship business, and we get this in coaching as well. In that relationship business, referrals are so golden and they are so valuable to you. And that social proof of reviews on Google or reviews on your website or wherever you may have that are just so valuable when people are trying to make that buying decision now.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So tell me, I mean, we talked a little bit, outside of this. You mentioned you're a runner, and that athletic personality that comes with that. How does that competitiveness translate into what you're doing in the business?
The word competitive, I get dinged, all the time in the sense like even on the dinner table, right? My wife's biggest pet
Uh
peeve
oh.
is just you're way too competitive, right? And so I got to balance that, right? You don't want to be hyper competitive either. Where
Yeah.
I leverage that in a positive sense is I'm running a business. At the end of the day, I got to maintain my margins and grow revenue. It's just simple as that, right? Now, how do I go about doing that? I am very much a goal driven individual, right? I
Mm-hmm.
tell my, I'll kind of frame that in the context of running, because you brought up running, right? So
Sure.
um, I run. I train for races year long. I run a couple of marathons every year, and in doing so, I've built a community of folks that I run often, right? Now, some of those individuals, they don't need a race to train. They have that discipline to get up every morning, put in your miles, and then go for a long run on Sunday with the crew.
Mhm.
They can do that. I am not that disciplined, right? So I need to have something signed up. Hey, I got a race coming up in another 4 weeks. Here's my training plan every day. Here are my things I need to do, right? Whether it's cross training, lifting, doing a long run. So you know at the end of the day, that goal that I have set for myself is what's driving me, and I bring that for my business as well, right? Goal setting for me is a big one, right? In construction, it's actually quite difficult, right? Because I always tell my customers, hey, here's the project schedule, but
Mhm.
we can't guarantee this because I can't control weather, I can't
Sure.
control supply chain, right? Global politics, right? So but at least we have a goal. So I always tell my crew, listen, these are our goals we got to meet, right? These are our quality standards. We need to pass inspections on such and such day. So that goal-driven culture is what I thrive on, and I try to bring it from my sports side of my life into the business side of my life.
Well, and it sounds like there's no bringing it from one side of your life to the other. It's just who you are. Right. And I think it's good to have that inherent in yourself. It's good to understand the goal direction, that you are driven to those goals, whether it be on the personal and running side, whether it's in the business. Excuse me. The challenge as we grow is to keep everybody on board with the goals of the business,
Yeah.
and get them to start to feel that same passion as what you have. Um, in the past, when you've had teams and other individuals, other investors, people that you're working with in your businesses, how do you get them on board with your goals? How do you get them to feel that same passion for them?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really important question, right? Oftentimes, what happens is you set goals that are driven by one individual's sort of the wish list, right? And then you don't have buy-in from the stakeholders, whether it's your
Right.
team members, your direct reports, whatever, right? I've made my mistakes, right, earlier on in my career, but one thing I have learned is when you set goals, first thing is you got to have buy-in from everybody. And the way to do the buy-in, and this is just a simple thing I use, thanks to one of my mentors who's taught me about it, is to make sure your goals are measurable, right? So that somebody can measure and you can go back and say, did you achieve it, did you fail? You can kind of challenge it, right? Second one is make them realistic, right? These
Yep.
goals have to be realistic. Like don't give goals that are just completely out of this world, that is completely unrealistic, right? And the third one is achievability, right? You want to set goals that are achievable. So for me, I've learned my lessons. Now I'm really maniacal about when I set goals for myself or my team, right? I make sure they are measurable, right? They're
Mhm.
achievable, and then they're realistic. So that just those simple three things have helped me get the buy-in from all the stakeholders.
I like that. Yeah, I think that as we talk about SMART goals, as we talk about those components of them, I think it makes it very. Um, it allows them the ability to adopt those goals and to take those goals on themselves as part of the organization,
Yeah,
and to buy into those goals very, very easily. So I like the fact that you define them so specifically for individuals. Sometimes we say, hey, we're headed to the top of that hill, and that's it.
yeah,
Right. Or as I've seen with several of my clients, I just had this conversation with one last week. They set a revenue goal. Well, a revenue is a trailing metric. I don't, maybe I don't impact revenue goals, right? But breaking that goal, yes, we can still shoot for a revenue goal, but let's break it down to the actions that determine that goal.
yeah,
What are the actions that we can measure, that we know whether we are changing behavior the correct way or if we're going in a different direction, to make sure that we are moving towards those goals?
yeah. And that's another thing, right? Often people make these goals based on lagging metrics, right? So to your point about revenue really is a lagging metric, right? But
Yep.
you want to make sure you're measured on the leading metrics, because oftentimes, even in whether it's a small business, big corporation, doesn't matter. If you peg your goals to revenue, it's too late when you find out that you're not making the revenue goals, right? Because it's
Yep.
because some leading metric that leads into revenue failed.
Yep. That's very true.
Yeah.
So talk to me then. You just said that you want to increase sales, you want to increase marketing. What are some of those leading metrics that you're looking at right now for yourself that tells you you're moving in the right direction for that?
Yeah. So for us, one of the big things is lead conversion, right? So for
Mm-hmm.
us, just to kind of give you what these definitions mean, right? So we get a whole bunch of leads at the top of the funnel, right? Whether it's online, word of mouth, people find us, through referrals, whatnot, right? And
Yep.
then those leads then get validated or qualified, right? So today, through our web portal, one can put a little bit of information. My team gets it, so we can validate that and say, okay, this is a serious customer, whatnot. So from those validated leads, the next qualification is actually a job site visit, right? You book a meeting, right? And then once we book a meeting, we've got pretty good confidence that we can convert about um, you know most of those leads into a job, right? So if you kind of peel it back to the top of the funnel, which means from a qualified lead, we are roughly around 30% conversion ratio, right? Give or take 1 in 3, right? So our goal is to make sure we increase the number of qualified leads for this year by a
Yep.
certain metric, right? And the reason I'm pegging it to that is once we get a qualified lead, a lot lies on the team to actually win that job, right? Optimizing the project cost, making sure
Mm-hmm.
the margins are intact, right? So there's a lot of things going on to make sure we win the job. And that is, even if I hire salespeople, right, I cannot measure the success of a salesperson by winning the job because, operations, material costs. There's a lot goes on down there that are outside the control of a salesperson, right? So
Sure.
our goal today is to make sure we hire salespeople so that we increase the number of qualified leads coming into the funnel for this
Gotcha. Sounds like you've learned a lesson or two about that in the past.
year. Hey, this gray hair, right? You
Yeah.
learn lessons along the
I
way.
hear you. I've got it too. Um, Tell me a couple of the other lessons, right? You had the tech sector. You spent many years in the tech sector. You spent years at the brewery. Now you're over on the renovation cell side. Talk to me about those key lessons that made you the leader that you are today.
Yeah, I mean, another big one, and this, I always try to tie this back to my running as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Early days in my career, it doesn't have to be early days, right? Even if you peel back a few years, you have a tendency to look at the end goal right away, right? For example, you have a project, you got to deliver on a certain day, whether it's a renovation project, construction project, or even a tech project, right? We all have
Sure.
deadlines, right? The natural tendency to say, hey, I got to deliver this by, May 17th, right? But what you don't realize is getting there is just as important or probably equally important. And the successful way to get there is to actually break it down into small chunks, right? So one of the big lessons I learned was don't get intimidated by these deadlines. Don't get intimidated by the size and the sheer weight of this project. Let's break it down. Once we break it down, it actually becomes a lot more easier to solve the problem than trying to solve the end problem, right? Just like in running races, right? When I start a marathon, I do know I got to run 26.2 miles, but I am thinking about mile at a time, right? How do I
Sure.
get through this mile? How do I get through next mile? What nutrition do I need on mile number 6, right? How much hydration do I need by mile number 13? I don't think about, okay, well, what about mile 26.2, right? So I kind of look at that as a life lesson and I bring it to my projects. So oftentimes where we failed or where we mismanaged deadlines was when we kind of just focus on the end goal and we fail to break it down into, I call them biteable chunks, right?
Yep. Well, and I think the other thing about breaking it down that way is, based on past experience, miles 11 through 19 are going to be the toughest one for you, right? That's the toughest third for you to get through. Similar stuff happens in the job, right? There's that the deadlines are going to be most impacted by this spot in the job, right? Not getting people up and running, not getting the guys on site. Not it's day 3 or it's day 5 or something like that.
Yep.
And knowing that requires a little more management, a little more oversight,
Mhm.
a little more involvement from the leadership than anything else it's an interesting analogy to use.
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
that.
And the other thing I'll touch on another second point is outcomes versus outputs. Oftentimes, we made this mistake. I think, oftentimes it's a mistake the industry, whether it's tech or not, makes is we tend to measure things based on output. In the tech
Yeah,
industry, you would say, I wrote 1,000 lines of code, or I produced, 10,000 semiconductors or whatever, right? But they fail to measure that in terms of outcomes, right? Okay, 10,000 lines of code. What is the outcome that you actually achieve, right? We delivered an app 7 days earlier. That's an outcome, right? Yeah, you wrote 17,000 lines of code, but if you are late and if you blew the budget, that's a failure, right? So in construction industry, we do the same thing, right? Like when my guys come and say, I hung 37 drywalls today, right? Yeah, that's great, right? I mean, well, good for
sure.
you, right? But what is the outcome with you? Did we finish the room? Did we put the insulation behind that, right? Did we hang them in an efficient way? So let's think about not just the action of hanging drywall, but convert that into an outcome, right? We hung drywall, and saved 30% material cost because we were efficient in cutting it, right? Now that's an outcome as opposed to just a sheer output, right?
Yeah. And I think um, it, again, going back to it being a relationship business, taking those outcomes and tying them back to the original intent of the owner,
Yep,
right? This room was, going to be a baby's room, for instance.
yep,
And, they put just a little more insulation in there because, the outcome is this is going to be a baby's room. We want a little more soundproofing or whatever, right? Just understanding a little more about what the original relationship was based on and what they're hiring you for,
yep.
and then creating an outcome that matches those expectations.
Yeah, yeah, and that's honestly in the construction industry, that's a tough one, right? Because this is a very transactional industry.
Yep.
Subs come do a job and they're out of there, right? They treat it like I hung drywall and I'm done, right? Where I have seen success, and I look at it as a coaching opportunity as well to some of these younger folks, right? Is don't just look at this as a job. You walk in the door and you're out of the door, right? We are building a relationship. We want to understand the customer, and oftentimes we will probably come back 2 3 months later to just do a touch up, right? I'm like, it costs you very little effort to go back and slap this much of paint, right? But it means a world to the customer, right?
Sure.
And oftentimes if they're gonna give you some repeat business, there's a good chance they're gonna contact you, right? So I am kind of teaching some of these folks, okay, let's get away from this transactional nature and make it a lot more relationship business.
Yep. And I think that's on you as the CEO of the organization. It's on you to create that culture, even with the vendors that only work with us occasionally,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
It's good for you to get that out there. It's good for you to do it early. I like it. All right. Any others? Any other lessons pop along the way? Either in the way you manage personnel, maybe the way you handle the clients.
Yeah,
Um,
man, I sometimes probably get dinged for it, right? But I again, going back to this whole concept of relationships, I take it down to my
sure.
teams as well, right? For me, a team is a family, right? Whether I was managing folks at IBM or Citrix, um, they become my family, right? We start as, maybe a manager-employee relationship, whatever that is, right? But then years on, you become friends and family, right? You invite them for oftentimes Thanksgiving dinner, right? Or you grab beers years later. For me, it's that relationship you build, right? I jokingly always tell my younger employees, one day an old man might need a job, right? So I am that old
Yeah,
man. I might have to call one of my guys who work for me one day. It might be in a senior position. Who knows, right? You pass
sure.
people both going up and down. So make sure you emphasize the relationship. That's a mantra I use for myself. And I got that, with life, right? And just to give you an example, the guy who got me into running and got me from being a chubby early 30s guy, to being able to run marathons was my old manager. He was my manager, and something led to another. He's like, let's go run a race, right? And then we started running together just to improve fitness. We kind of hit it on, right? We and years on, I haven't worked for him in decades. We meet
Yeah,
every Sunday, right? We become almost like family. So that's very important to me.
I think that's funny. And to your point, I don't know if we understand early in our career, the whole idea of the youth is wasted, but I don't think we understand early enough in our careers the impact that the leaders that we have then is going to have for us
Yeah,
20, 30, 40 years
yeah,
down the
yeah, yeah.
road.
And
I had
it's
a
like networking, right? Like just the whole
yeah,
concept of network. There's no class
yeah.
in high school or college called, teach how to network 101, right? No.
Nope, not at all. Yeah, I was just on a podcast, I guess a little over a year ago, and he asked me about the top leadership lesson I ever had. And quite honestly, Shaluka, it went back to beginning part of my career, my
Okay.
first management position when I thought I knew it all, and I kind of dictated the way things should go, and the people that I hired and had working with me, I was directing and dictating and all that kind of stuff, and I wasn't getting the performance out of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And at one point, my supervisor at the time, I talked to him about it, and I found he was treating me a little differently. They did this person differently. They did that person, and at one point, I asked him about it, and he said, "Russ," he said, "you don't need that. You don't need that oversight from me. I point you in a direction, and you go. Others, they need a little more attention." And it made me realize that you can adapt your leadership style. You can be a chameleon and change the way you manage people based on what they need,
Right,
not what you think you have to do as a leader.
right.
But that was 30 years ago already, and still to this day, I use it in the way I work with my clients and the way I work with my partners and my vendors in my organization. Um, so those early management lessons are important ones for us, and I think everyone who is a leader at whatever stage in your career understand that you are impacting individuals in ways that you don't even know, and you may not know for years to come.
Yeah, and it's
So,
it's a it's a responsibility I take pretty seriously, right?
yep.
'Cause oftentimes they rely on you for guidance, they rely on you for a paycheck, livelihood, bunch of things, right? So, in many ways, that is where I kind of put the sort of the business side to the side a little bit, and
Hmm.
you look at that as a sort of a human interaction, right?
Well, it's the interpersonal manifestation of teaching a guy to hang drywall and put an extra nail in here because it works properly, whatever.
Yeah,
It's that interpersonal version of the same thing, right? You're teaching them something that they're going to impact lives of the people that they work with,
exactly.
the GCs that other GCs that they do work for, other households that they work on, and you'll never see most of those impacts, but just by having that conversation with him, you'll make a big impact on a lot of people.
Exactly.
That's good stuff. Um, so, from an entrepreneur standpoint, as long as we're talking about impacting people, if you were talking to young entrepreneurs right now, what would you tell them other than run for the hills? What would you tell them about being an entrepreneur?
Um, I think one of the big things I tell people is just be very realistic, right? You got to be grounded, right? Because
Hmm.
oftentimes people, like I said earlier on when I ran the brewery, right? I didn't know that it's going to be 16-hour days, right? We probably didn't fund the business as much as we want, right? So those little basic things for me are like be realistic, stay grounded, right? and take risks, right? Take risks. Oftentimes I wish I opened the brewery, or for that matter, a renovation business, maybe much earlier in my life, right? There's a time in our lives now, I have a family, right? But, doesn't matter whether you get married and have kids or not. As you get older, right, you just earn more responsibilities just in life, right? So the best time to take risks is when you're young, right? So for me, it's really three things: take risks, right? Don't be afraid, right? Take a risk, stay grounded, right? And be realistic about these things, right? I think if you do those three things, at least in my humble opinion, I think you're setting yourself for success.
Oh, I like that. Be realistic, take risks, and stay grounded. Right. Very
Yeah,
good. I like it. And understanding that, sometimes you just have to go out and make it happen.
yeah,
I think that quite often people wait for that shift to come in and they don't realize they have to swim out to meet it.
yeah,
It's kind of like having a kid. If you waited until you could afford having a kid, most of us wouldn't have a kid. Um, if you wait until you're ready to start a business or until you feel 100% ready for it,
yeah,
you're going to be waiting an awful long time.
yeah, exactly. Yep, you're absolutely right.
So this has been good. Shaluka, I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, no.
Anything else you want to say before you jump off the call?
One thing I tell my younger self and I tell my two daughters is take advantage of your network, build your network, right?
Mm,
Because they are gonna be both your, the wall to rely on, the shoulder to, lay down on, as
yep.
well as, it's a shoulder to rely on, basically, right? So, because it's something that we underestimate, right? We don't think about our network until we absolutely need it, right? Then we hustle to figure out, okay, well, what do I do? Who do I call, right? But it's like a little tree, right? You want to grow your network from the seed to the little plant and bigger, right? That's one thing I would tell anybody, right? Value your network, grow your network, safeguard your network.
I like it. And to the old adage, best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is right now.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
go out and start building the network when you can.
Yeah, yeah, well said.
Good stuff. Thank you, Shaluka.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
yeah, glad being here. Thank you for the opportunity, Russ.
Appreciate it. So that's a wrap for this episode of Legacy Unscripted. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't just sit on it. Take action today to build your future. Make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with someone who may need to hear it. And if you've got a story to share or you just want to connect with us, you know where to find me. Until next time, keep it real, keep it bold, and keep living your legacy.